The first time I realized my family was trying to take half my company, I was sitting across from one of my oldest clients when he smiled, shook my hand, and said, "Congratulations on bringing the family businesses back together." I didn't shake back. Not right away. On the table between us was a proposal I had never seen before. At the top were two logos: Ellison Event Supply and Northline Exhibit Works. My company, side by side beneath the words Strategic Family Partnership. The proposal promised access to our fabrication shop, our production team, and our installation capacity for a trade show project starting in 3 weeks. None of it had been approved by me. None of it had even been discussed with me. And the people behind it were the same family who had kicked me out at 16 because I refused to lie for my older brother. I finally looked up at Cameron Whitaker, Hawthorne Outdoors Procurement Director. "Who gave you this?" His smile disappeared. "Your brother," Derek said. The integration was being finalized. Nami Chen, my operations director, was sitting 2 seats down from me. I saw her straighten in her chair. Naomi had worked with me for 6 years. She knew almost everything happening inside Northline, which meant the look on her face told me this wasn't some agreement I'd somehow forgotten about. "There is no integration," I said. Cameron glanced at the proposal again. "Mara, this has your company's name all over it." "I can see that." My voice sounded calmer than I felt, but nobody at Northline authorized it. That changed the room instantly. Hawthorne had worked with us for nearly 5 years. They trusted our deadlines, our estimates, and most importantly, our word. In our industry, one bad installation could cost a client a convention. One promise you couldn't deliver could follow you for years. Cameron slid the proposal toward me. "Then, I think you need to figure out what's going on before we move forward." I nodded, thanked him for bringing it to me, and ended the meeting 10 minutes early. The moment the door closed, Naomi picked up the proposal. "Please tell me Derek is not stupid enough to promise our production capacity without asking you." I haven't spoken to Derek in 11 months. That answers my question. We went straight downstairs to the operations office. Northline wasn't some giant corporation with marble floors and private elevators. I had 43 employees, a warehouse, a fabrication shop, 2 Sing routers, a paint booth that broke down whenever humidity got too high, and enough recurring clients to keep all of it moving. I had spent 14 years building that business. I knew which clients paid slowly, which vendors needed deposits, which machines could handle an overnight run, and which promises we never made, because keeping a client sometimes meant having the nerve to tell them no. That was why seeing my family's company name beside mine felt less like an insult and more like someone walking into my house and changing the locks. Naomi pulled in our sales manager and procurement lead. Within 20 minutes, we knew no one inside Northline had sent the proposal. Then our procurement lead mentioned something that made the back of my neck tighten. A supplier had asked 3 days earlier whether Northline wanted pricing based on combined purchasing volume with Ellison Event Supply. He had assumed it was industry gossip and ignored it. "Find every reference," I said. "Emails, calls, vendor notes, anything with Ellison's name attached to ours." Naomi nodded. "And Derek." Before I could answer, my desk phone rang from upstairs. Reception. "Mara, there are 3 people here asking for you. Derek Ellison, Grant Ellison, and Paula Ellison. My brother, my father, my mother, together." I stared through the glass wall toward the fabrication floor. 17 years earlier, those 3 names had meant home. Now they were standing in my lobby after apparently announcing a merger I had never agreed to. "Conference room only," I said. "And let security know they're not to go anywhere else in the building." Derek walked in first 20 minutes later. He was 38 now, still carrying himself like every room was waiting for him to arrive. He had always been good with people. Even as a teenager, Derek could break something and somehow make the person standing next to him feel responsible for it. My father came behind him looking older than the last time I'd seen him, shoulders slightly rounded but expression unchanged. My mother avoided my eyes until she sat down. Naomi stayed beside me. Derek noticed. This is family business. Mara? It became Northline business when you put my logo on your proposal. He exhaled like I was making things difficult on purpose. Then he opened a folder and slid a page toward me. What I'm proposing fixes both companies' problems. Northline doesn't have a problem. Not yet. Naomi glanced at me, but I kept my eyes on Derek. He laid it out like a sales pitch. Ellison Event Supply had decades of relationships, established accounts, rental inventory, and the family name. Northline had modern fabrication equipment, production staff, newer contracts, and room to grow. Put the businesses together, he said, and we could compete for projects neither company could handle alone. 50-50? He finished. For a second I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. You want 50% of Northline. Of the combined operation. There is no combined operation. My father finally spoke. Mara, you learned this business with us. I turned toward him. I worked Saturdays in your warehouse when I was 15. Exactly. You paid me $6 an hour. Derek leaned back. Nobody is saying you didn't build something impressive, but pretending Northline came out of nowhere is ridiculous. You grew up around our clients, our equipment, our industry. There it was. Not gratitude, not reconciliation. Ownership by proximity. I looked at my mother. You agree with this? Paula pressed her lips together. I think everybody would benefit if you stopped looking at this through what happened years ago. What happened years ago? That was how my family referred to the weekend they threw me out. I was 16 when Derek, 21 at the time, mishandled an expensive lighting system during a rental job and tried to pin the damage on a teenage warehouse assistant. Our biggest client was threatening to leave. My father asked me to confirm Derek's version because I had been working that afternoon. I refused. 3 days later, my clothes were packed and I was told that if I couldn't stand with my family, I shouldn't expect my family to stand with me. I spent the rest of high school living in the spare room of my former art teacher, Mrs. Holloway. I hadn't needed my parents' approval since, but apparently they still believed they owned the lessons I learned while surviving them. You're not getting half my company, I said. Derek leaned forward. You should hear the whole plan before you make this personal. You put my company on proposals without permission. It was personal before you walked through my door. My father's jaw tightened. This isn't the first time you've chosen being right over standing with us. I felt the old 16-year-old version of me stir somewhere deep inside. The girl who had once spent hours trying to explain that telling the truth wasn't betrayal. I didn't let her answer. Meeting's over. They left angry, but not worried. That bothered me more than anything they said. Derek looked like a man who believed the decision had already been made, and I simply hadn't accepted it yet. 10 minutes later, Naomi came into my office carrying a printed email. We found something. I read it once, then again. Ellison Event Supply had already contacted one of our regular material suppliers, asking them to reserve inventory for projects that supposedly would be fabricated at Northline. I looked at the delivery dates. 3 weeks. Naomi nodded. That's the first one. I looked up. First. She placed another sheet on my desk. Mara, I don't think they're planning to use your company. She paused. I think they already have. By 8 the next morning, I had Naomi, our sales manager, our finance lead, and procurement sitting around the small leadership table with coffee nobody was drinking. I put the fake partnership proposal in the middle of us and asked one question. How many people outside this building think Ellison Event Supply owns part of Northline? Nobody answered right away, which was answer enough. By 9:30, we had a list. 7 outside contacts had either received a proposal, heard the phrase, strategic family partnership, or been told some version of the same story Northline and Ellison were combining capabilities. Derek had been careful. He hadn't said a legal merger was finished. He hadn't forged my signature or claimed he already owned stock. He had done something smarter. He had spoken as if the partnership was inevitable, close enough to completion that clients and vendors felt safe planning around it. "We correct it now," I said. "Top clients first, then suppliers. No accusations, no family details, just facts." Our sales manager hesitated. "Do we say there's a dispute?" "No, we say Northline remains independently owned and operated, and no outside company is authorized to commit our people, equipment, or production schedule." Naomi nodded. Clean. Who needs to be? The last thing I wanted was to turn this into some public Ellison family circus. Derek had already dragged my company into something messy. I wasn't going to help him make it messier. We started calling clients personally. Most were confused, a few embarrassed, and one sounded irritated that he had apparently planned a project around something that didn't exist. Then, just before lunch, our sales manager transferred a call into my office. The client was a regional medical equipment company called Valero Systems. I had met their marketing director twice, but Northline had never done a full project for them. "Mara," he said carefully, "I just want to make sure I understand. Are you saying Northline won't honor the package Derek sold us?" I sat forward. "What package?" There was a pause. "The Spring Expo build. Derek said Ellison would handle account management and rentals, and Northline would handle custom fabrication." Naomi was standing near my door. I motioned her in. "Can you send me the contract?" I asked. "I can send you the scope. Contract is with Ellison." 5 minutes later, the document hit my inbox. The first page looked ordinary enough: booth design, flooring, rental furniture, transport. Then I reached the fabrication section. Custom illuminated walls, Fink, cut dimensional lettering, laminated counters, hanging elements requiring engineered support. Production schedule Northline exhibit works. I read it twice, then looked at Naomi. "They can't build this." "Not with what they have." Ellison Event Supply had rental inventory and a small repair shop. They could repaint a counter, replace hardware, build simple wood structures if they had time. They could not fabricate what Derek had sold. I kept reading. A 40% deposit had already been collected. "How much?" Naomi asked. I turned the page toward her. Her eyebrows lifted. "That's not a small deposit." No, it wasn't. And suddenly, I understood part of Derek's confidence from the day before. He had put money into the system. Once a client paid, a deadline existed. Once a deadline existed, someone had to deliver. He was betting that person would be me. I called Derek. He answered on the second ring. I was wondering how long it would take. "Valero paid you a deposit for work you told them Northline would produce." "They paid Ellison for a complete project." "That isn't what I asked." "You're getting stuck on technicalities." I stared at the contract on my screen. "Production capacity is not a technicality." Derek sighed. "Mara, listen to yourself. We have the account, you have the shop. We combine the two, everybody gets paid. The client gets what they ordered. And we stop wasting time pretending these businesses aren't better together. You sold something you don't own. I sold a project I know we can execute. If you stop acting like I'm asking you for charity. You are asking me to fulfill your contract. I'm asking you to join the family business." There it was again. He could change the wording as many times as he wanted, but the mechanism stayed the same. Create the problem first, then call my refusal the real problem. "Northline will not produce a single item under an Ellison contract," I said. His voice sharpened. "Then you're going to leave Valero hanging over some teenage grudge." I let the silence sit for a second. "No, I'm going to figure out what Northline can realistically offer them directly. What I'm not going to do is let you turn your promises into my obligations. You think clients care whose fault this is when their booth doesn't show up. That landed because it was true. Not the way Derek meant it, but enough. Clients did not care about our family history. They cared about opening day. If their display was missing because 2 siblings were fighting, Northline's name could still get dragged through it, even if I had never signed anything. Send me every project where you used Northline's name, I said. There's no reason to make this hostile. Send me the list. Talk to Dad first. I hung up. Naomi had heard enough from across the room to understand. Third option, she asked. There has to be one. I opened the Valero production schedule. We do not honor Derek's deal. We do not accept his deposit. We do not let him set our pricing or timelines. But if a client wants to contract directly with us, we tell them what we can actually do. Naomi considered that. And if they've already paid Ellison? That stays between them and Ellison, who's going to say you're stealing his customers. Probably. Your parents too. Definitely. She gave me a thin smile. Good morning, Mara. It would have been funny if my phone hadn't rung again. This time it was my mother. I nearly let it go to voicemail, then answered. Mara, please don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Derek accepted money for work my company never agreed to do. The business is having a difficult quarter. That was the first honest sentence anyone in my family had said since they walked into Northline. I stood and moved toward the window. How difficult. Your father has spent 2 years building that company. You know what losing it would do to him. That wasn't my question. She lowered her voice. Derek is trying to keep everyone working. He wouldn't have promised anything if he didn't believe you would eventually do the right thing. I closed my eyes for 1 second. At 16, doing the right thing had meant lying for Derek. At 33, apparently it meant letting him sell my company before I agreed to share it. Mom, what exactly do you think I owe him? This isn't about owing Derek. Then why is every solution built around protecting him from what he already did? She didn't answer. After the call, Naomi came in carrying 3 printed project summaries. She placed them side by side on my desk. Valero was only one. Derek had tied Northline's supposed fabrication capacity to 2 more major projects, both already moving towards scheduled production. One belonged to a new corporate client. The other name made my stomach tighten. Hawthorne Outdoor, the same client who had first shown me the fake partnership proposal. The same account that represented one of Northline's biggest renewal opportunities that year. Naomi tapped the Hawthorne sheet. If this collapses, they won't separate Ellison's mistake from Northline's reputation as neatly as we'd like. I looked at 3 projects, 3 deadlines, and 3 promises my brother had made using a company he didn't own. Yesterday, my family had demanded half of Northline. Today, I understood why they thought they could get it. They weren't planning to convince me. They were planning to make saying no too expensive. 2 days later, Hawthorne Outdoor did exactly what Naomi had warned me they might do. Cameron Whitaker appeared on my screen with Hawthorne's finance director beside him, and before he even started talking, I knew this wasn't going to be another request for clarification. We're putting the annual renewal on hold, he said. I kept my hands flat on the desk. That contract would have filled a significant part of our fall production calendar. We weren't dependent on Hawthorne to survive, but losing them would hurt. More importantly, they had been with Northline for almost 5 years. Because of the Ellison proposal? I asked. Because we don't know what's happening, Cameron said. You're telling us there's no partnership. Derek is telling people there's a family dispute over how the partnership will be structured. I'm not saying I believe him. I'm saying I can't recommend another 12-month commitment until I know who has authority over what. That was the part Derek understood better than I wanted to admit. He didn't have to convince people that he owned Northline. He only had to make them uncertain enough to hesitate. I understand, I said. You'll have written confirmation of Northline's ownership and operating structure today. I'm not going to ask you to make a decision before you're comfortable with it. Cameron nodded. I appreciate that. The call ended, and I stayed in my chair staring at the blank screen. Naomi was sitting across from me. You don't have to pretend that didn't hurt, she said. I'm not pretending. You're doing the thing where your face stops moving. I looked at her. That's not a thing. It's absolutely a thing. I almost smiled, but then she slid a staffing projection toward me. Hawthorne's renewal had been part of our expected full workload. Without it, we didn't need the 2 additional fabrication hires we had planned, and overtime projections would have to come down. Nobody was losing a job. Not yet, but Derek's decisions had moved beyond proposals and uncomfortable phone calls. Something had actually been taken from Northline. "Freeze the hiring," I said. "Not cancel, freeze." Naomi nodded. "And overtime. Recalculate after we know which of the 3 projects we're taking, if any." That afternoon I walked through the fabrication shop. Usually the noise made it impossible to think about anything except what was directly in front of you. Saws, routers, compressors, forklifts backing through marked lanes. That day, people kept looking at me. Finally, Marcus, one of our team leads, caught me near the finishing area. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are we being sold?" 2 employees nearby suddenly became very interested in what they were doing. "No." "Because somebody said your family is taking part of the company." "Nobody is taking part of Northline." I said it clearly enough for the people around us to hear. There is no merger and no ownership change. Marcus nodded, but he still looked uneasy. "So jobs are okay?" I could have told him everything was fine. It would have made the conversation easier. It also would have made me sound exactly like the people I was angry with. "Our business is stable," I said. "But some client decisions are temporarily on hold while we clear this up. We've frozen planned hiring. We are not planning layoffs." He seemed to appreciate the distinction. "Okay, thanks for telling me straight." As I walked back upstairs, I realized that was the first moment this stopped feeling like a fight over my company and started feeling like a fight over everyone inside it. 43 people had come to work that morning expecting me to know what I was doing. None of them had agreed to become collateral damage in an Ellison family argument. Reception called before I reached my office. My father was downstairs, alone. I considered telling him to leave. Instead, I met him at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. If he wanted to talk, he wasn't doing it inside Northline. Grant was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. He looked tired. Not defeated, just older than he had 2 days earlier. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "Good." I sat opposite him. "Then tell Derek to stop using my company's name." "He will." "When?" My father rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Mara, there are projects already in motion." "Projects he sold." "Projects clients are expecting." "Those are not the same thing." He leaned closer. "Just help us get through the existing commitments. Your shop handles fabrication. Ellison manages the accounts. Once those jobs are complete, we sit down and work out a structure everybody can live with." I stared at him. "You want me to merge first and discuss whether I agreed afterward?" "I'm asking you to stop treating every conversation like somebody is trying to cheat you." Hawthorne froze my renewal this morning. That silenced him for a moment. "I'm sorry to hear that. Hear you?" His expression hardened. "This is exactly what I mean. Derek made mistakes. Nobody is saying otherwise. But you're letting what happened 17 years ago dictate what you do now." "Derek is using my company without permission now. Because he believed you'd eventually see that bringing the businesses together makes sense." Why would he believe that? My father looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because this is where you came from." I leaned back. There it was again. The assumption that no matter how far I went, some invisible string still connected everything I built to them. "You kicked me out of where I came from." His mouth tightened. "We were trying to teach you something. I learned it." "Apparently not." He lowered his voice. "Sometimes protecting your family means doing something you don't completely agree with." For a second, the coffee shop disappeared. I was 16 again, standing inside the old warehouse office, while my father explained that all I had to do was confirm Derek's version of what happened. Nobody had asked whether Derek should tell the truth. Nobody had asked what would happen to the teenage employee he was blaming. The only question had been whether I would cooperate. 17 years later, the numbers were bigger, but the rule was identical. Derek created the problem. Mara proved her loyalty by absorbing it. I stood. Northline will not fulfill Ellison contracts. If clients want to work directly with us, we'll decide what we can take. My father stared at me. So you are taking his customers? No. I'm giving people an option after Derek sold them something he couldn't deliver. You've wanted to punish him since you were 16. If I wanted to punish Derek, I'd let every deadline fail. I put my hand on the back of the chair. I'm trying to stop his customers from paying for his decisions. Grant shook his head. He told us you always planned to come back eventually. I suppose I was stupid enough to believe him. I stopped. Told you what? That once Northline was established, there'd be a way to bring everything together. I never said that. My father looked at me for a long second, but I couldn't tell whether he believed me. I left before the conversation turned into another trial, where I had to prove what I had or hadn't promised. That evening, my cousin Elise called. We hadn't spoken in months. She handled some bookkeeping for Ellison Event Supply, and had apparently heard about my meeting with Grant. Mara, I'm not trying to take sides, she said, but Derek has been talking about you coming back for years. Talking to whom? Everybody? Your parents, some of the staff. Me? Did you ever hear it from me? Silence. No. Then why did you believe it? Because it made sense. I laughed once, without humor. Apparently that's enough in my family. Elise became defensive. He's not making everything up. The company really does need the work. I can show you. Don't send me anything you aren't allowed to share. It's not secret, it's just the project cash flow sheet we use for scheduling payments. A few minutes later, a spreadsheet arrived. Elise had sent it to prove Derek was desperate, not dishonest. I opened it expecting to see thin margins and delayed invoices. Instead, I saw new client deposits arriving days before old vendor balances were being paid. I followed the dates down the page, then checked the upcoming expenses against the money still available. My irritation disappeared. I called Naomi. Are you still at the office? For another 10 minutes. Stay there. What did you find? I looked at the spreadsheet again. Derek wasn't simply overselling projects. He was running out of room to keep the company moving. I think I finally know why they need half of Northline. The spreadsheet didn't contain a confession, a secret account, or anything dramatic enough to explain my family by itself. It was ordinary bookkeeping: deposits received, vendor balances, scheduled payments, upcoming project expenses. But I had spent 14 years learning what it actually cost to build things on time. By 9 the next morning, Naomi and I were sitting with our finance lead, going line by line through numbers that looked worse the longer we studied them. Look at this, I said, pointing to a payment near the bottom. A deposit from a new project had arrived on the 6th. 2 days later, Ellison Event Supply paid 3 overdue vendor invoices connected to older jobs. Another deposit came in the following week. That money immediately disappeared into expenses that had nothing to do with the project it came from. Naomi leaned closer to the screen. They're chasing cash. Exactly. I wasn't saying Derek had stolen deposits. Businesses sometimes used incoming cash to manage outgoing obligations. That alone wasn't proof of anything improper. The problem was what came next. Ellison had promised projects with margins that only worked if Northline supplied fabrication at costs Derek seemed to have invented. He wasn't simply hoping my company would help. His future numbers depended on it. Without our equipment, labor, vendor terms, and production efficiency, those projects could cost Ellison more to deliver than Derek had priced them for. Our finance lead tapped the screen. If they have another bad month, they're in trouble. Naomi finished. I sat back. For the first time, the 50% demand made complete sense. Derek didn't just want a piece of a successful company. He needed Northline attached to Ellison Event Supply before enough people realized his own company couldn't support what he had promised. If he could make the merger happen, Northline's production margins could stabilize the jobs he had already sold. Our vendor relationships could improve purchasing terms. Our equipment could replace outsourcing costs. And our reputation could reassure clients long enough for him to keep moving. It was reckless, but there was a logic to it that almost made it worse. Did your mother know? Naomi asked. I looked at the spreadsheet. I'm going to find out. I drove to my parents' house that afternoon. It was the first time I had been inside in nearly 2 years. My mother was alone in the kitchen, sorting mail at the table. She looked surprised when I walked in, then nervous when she saw the folder under my arm. Where's Dad? At the warehouse. Good. I sat across from her and placed a printed summary of the numbers between us. How bad is Ellison doing? Paula didn't touch the paper. I told you, it's been a difficult quarter. This isn't a difficult quarter. She looked toward the window. That small movement told me more than her answer would have. How much did you know? Your brother said the larger projects would stabilize things. The larger projects depend on Northline. That was always supposed to be part of the plan. I stared at her. Whose plan? Mara, please, no, I need you to answer that. Did I ever tell you I would merge my company with Derek's? Not directly. Did I ever tell Dad? Not that I know of. Then there was no plan. She folded her hands tightly. Derek believed once you saw the opportunity. He sold the opportunity before I saw it. My mother's expression changed, just slightly. Fear. Not fear of me, fear of what would happen if I refused. I lowered my voice. Mom? Did you know he was accepting deposits for projects Northline hadn't agreed to produce? I knew there were new contracts. I didn't know every detail. But you knew Ellison needed Northline. She looked down. Your father put his entire life into that business. I waited. Some small part of me still wanted her to say the obvious thing. Derek shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have been dragged into it. We'll fix what we can without asking you to surrender what you built. Instead, she looked up and said, Then you understand why we need you. Something in me went quiet. 17 years earlier, I had stood in another room with the same woman trying to explain why I wouldn't lie about what Derek had done. I remembered thinking that if I found the right words, she would understand. If I explained clearly enough, she would stop my father from throwing me out. For years afterward, I had carried the belief that they simply hadn't understood me. Sitting across from my mother at 33, I finally saw the problem. They had understood. They had simply decided that protecting Derek and preserving the family structure mattered more. And I was doing the same thing again, trying to get them to acknowledge the unfairness before I gave myself permission to act. I have to go, I said. Mara, what are you going to do? Protect my company. And what about us? I stood. That depends on what you mean by us. Back at Northline, Naomi had covered an entire whiteboard with the 3 projects Derek had tied to our supposed partnership. She had broken each one into materials, fabrication hours, installation requirements, existing Northline commitments, and deadline risk. I have bad news, she said. We cannot save all 3. I know. No, I mean physically cannot, not without pushing our own clients or running the shop beyond what I'm willing to call safe or reliable. 16-year-old me would have heard that as failure. 33-year-old me heard it as a boundary. We went project by project. Valero could fit if they accepted a revised design and direct contract. The second project could work if installation dates moved by 4 days. Hawthorne's project was different. Derek had priced it around a timeline that would force us to displace work we had already promised to someone else. We say no, I said. Naomi looked at me carefully. You know what Derek will do with that? He'll say I refuse to help. Probably louder than that. Then he can be loud. I took a marker and drew a line through the Hawthorne project. We do the two we can actually promise. We do not break promises to rescue promises we never made. Naomi nodded. That's the rule. That's the rule. We spent the next 2 hours building direct offers for the 2 clients. New prices, new timelines. No Ellison discounts carried over automatically. No transfer of deposits. No vague shared responsibility. If clients chose Northline, they would know exactly what Northline was responsible for. I was leaving the office when Derek called. You contacted Valero? Yes. You're stealing my customers. They called us first because you sold them our fabrication capacity. They signed with Ellison. Then fulfilled the contract you sold them. Silence. You know we can't build that in-house. It was the closest Derek had come to acknowledging reality. Then you shouldn't have sold it that way. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You finally get to punish everybody because Mom and Dad chose me 17 years ago. I stopped walking. This isn't about what they chose then. Of course it is. No, Derek. This is about what you chose 3 weeks ago. His voice hardened. Dad has relationships in this industry older than your company. People know where you learned this business. You might want to remember that before you start acting like Ellison means nothing. I looked through the glass wall at the Northline logo above the fabrication floor. Is that a threat? It's reality? Good, I said. Then we'll both have to work with reality. I ended the call. A minute later, Naomi stepped out of her office. Everything okay? No. I picked up my bag. But I think Derek just told me what he's going to do next. Until that moment, he had tried to use Northline's production capacity to force me into his company. Now that I had started cutting that connection, he was going after the one asset he thought I couldn't replace, the network my father had spent 32 years building. And for the first time since this started, I knew exactly what battlefield we were on. The next morning, Naomi walked into the strategy room and found me staring at a whiteboard divided into 2 columns. On the left, I had written people we can protect. On the right, problems we do not own. She set her coffee down and read both headings. Subtle. I'm trying something new. Boundaries. Apparently. She smiled, then opened her laptop. We spent the next hour turning that idea into actual numbers. Valero went in the first column. So did the second client Derek had promised our fabrication capacity to. We could help both without delaying work Northline had already committed to. Derek's pricing went in the second column. His deposits went there too. So did Ellison Event Supply's debt, its promises, and whatever ownership arrangement my family had invented. If Valero wanted Northline, they would receive a new contract with a revised scope, a realistic deadline, and our pricing. They would still have to resolve the deposit they had already paid Ellison. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was an honest one. I called Valero's marketing director myself. I want to be clear before we discuss numbers. I told him, Northline is not taking over your Ellison contract. We can offer you a separate agreement for the fabrication and installation work we can actually perform. What happens to the money we already paid Derek? That's something Ellison needs to resolve with you. He was quiet for a moment. So we could end up paying twice while we fight to get the first deposit back. Potentially, yes. I hated saying it, but I wasn't going to hide the risk just to win the project. Then why wouldn't we wait for Ellison to sort this out? You can, but your opening date doesn't move while they sort it out. By that afternoon, Valero accepted a revised Northline proposal. They cut 2 expensive design elements and moved 1 installation date, but the project was real, achievable, and ours. When the signed agreement came through, Naomi leaned against my office door. One customer out of Derek's trap. Don't call it that. Why? Because if I start thinking of clients as pieces I'm taking from him, I'm doing exactly what he's doing. Her expression softened. Fair. The second client took longer, but by the following morning they agreed to negotiate directly too. For the first time since the fake partnership proposal landed on my table, Derek had less leverage than he'd had the day before. That didn't mean Northline was safe. Hawthorne's renewal was still frozen. Our planned hiring was still on hold. And the rumors had reached enough employees that pretending nothing was happening would only make them worse. So Friday afternoon, I shut down production 15 minutes early and gathered everyone on the shop floor. 43 people stood between worktables and equipment while I climbed onto the small platform we normally used for safety briefings. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say. Then I looked at Marcus and the others who had been whispering about their jobs, and threw most of the rehearsal away. Some of you have heard that Northline is merging with Ellison Event Supply, I said. We are not. There is no ownership change. There is no signed partnership. Nobody outside this company has authority over your jobs, our equipment, or our schedule. A few shoulders visibly relaxed. There is a dispute involving commitments another company made using Northline's name. We are dealing with those commitments individually. One client has paused a future contract while they review the situation. So we've temporarily frozen planned hiring. We are not planning layoffs. Nobody applauded. I didn't want them to. They asked questions. I answered the ones I could and told them when I didn't know something. Before everyone returned to work, I added one promise. If ownership of Northline ever changes while I'm running this company, you will hear it from us before you hear it from a customer or a rumor. Later, Naomi found me near the finishing area. That was better than an email. Lower bar, still better. For about 3 hours, I thought we might finally be getting ahead of the problem. Then my phone started ringing. The first call came from an industry contact I had known for almost a decade. He sounded uncomfortable. Mara, I'm not getting involved in family stuff, but I thought you should know Grant's been making calls. What kind of calls? Who says Ellison helped create what Northline became, and now you're using their financial trouble to pull accounts away. I closed my eyes briefly. My father had spent 32 years in the event industry. He knew venue managers, installers, rental companies, suppliers, exhibit agencies, and clients I had never worked with directly. Some people had known me since I was a teenager carrying inventory sheets through his warehouse. Derek had found the lever he warned me about. Thank you for telling me, I said. Are you going to respond? Not with family history. Might be difficult not to. Then I'll be difficult. I could have started calling the same people and telling them exactly why I left home at 16. I could have explained the damaged lighting system, the employee Derek tried to blame, the years my parents barely contacted me afterward. Most of it was true. None of it would get Valero's display built. So I told our team the same thing I had told myself, facts only. Northline was independent. Northline had not authorized Derek's promises. Northline would honor every contract Northline actually signed. By Monday, however, I learned that reputation didn't have to become a public scandal to become expensive. Our primary laminate and sheet goods supplier placed a large material release on hold. Naomi and I joined a video call with their account manager, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. We're not canceling anything, he said. Our credit team just needs clarification on the ownership issue. There is no ownership issue, I said. Northline is owned exactly as it was last month. We've heard there may be a claim involving Ellison Event Supply. I knew where that wording had come from. I can send corporate ownership records, payment history, and our current authorization list today. That would help. How long until the material releases? Aunt's credit clears it, probably 48 hours. Naomi looked at me. 2 days, on a normal project. 2 days was annoying. On Valero, after rebuilding the schedule to rescue a deadline Derek should never have promised, 2 days consumed almost all our buffer. Send me exactly what your credit team needs, I said. You'll have it within the hour. The moment the call ended, Naomi stood. I'll handle the documents. I can do it. I know you can. That's becoming part of the problem. I looked at her. Excuse me, you're trying to personally prove Northline is stable to every client, supplier, employee, and subcontractor who gets nervous. Meanwhile, we have an actual company to run. She wasn't wrong, which irritated me more than if she had been. Fine, you handle credit. And you? I'm going to figure out where the next pressure point is. The materials eventually cleared, but exactly as promised, 2 days late. Our production lead rebuilt the schedule. Valero was still possible, but the margin for error had disappeared. Then Naomi called me into her office. Installation. She turned her monitor toward me. One of the subcontractor crews we had used for years had suddenly declined the dates we had tentatively reserved. Booked? I asked. That's what they said. They confirmed availability last week. I know. The company had worked with my father long before they worked with me. I thought about Derek's warning. Dad has relationships in this industry older than your company. The material delay might have been ordinary caution. This felt different. How many of our regular installation partners came through Ellison's network? I asked. Naomi went still. More than I'd like the answer to be. I looked out toward the shop floor, where the first Valero components were finally entering production. I had spent 17 years believing independence meant my family owned nothing inside Northline. Legally, they didn't. Financially, they didn't. But I was beginning to understand that some of the infrastructure around my company still ran through relationships my father had built. Derek couldn't take my machines. He couldn't take my shares. So he was going to test whether Northline could function without the network surrounding them. Map every dependency. I told Naomi. Installers, freight, specialty vendors, rental partners. Anyone we rely on because they've always been there. And if half of them connect back to Grant, then we find out whether they work with Northline because of my father or because we're good business. Naomi nodded and reached for her laptop. For the first time, Derek's countermove had actually put one of my rescue projects in danger. But it had also shown me something I should have examined years ago. He thought my family's network was a chain around my company. I was about to find out whether it was a chain at all. By Tuesday morning, the Valero project had become a test of everything I claimed Northline did differently. The materials were finally on our floor, but 2 lost days meant every department was working with almost no buffer. Naomi had moved fabrication shifts, our production lead had rearranged finishing, and we had cut one decorative element after getting Valero's approval, rather than pretending we could still deliver the original scope without consequences. The project was tight, but possible. Installation was the problem. I called Mason Crew Services again. Naomi told me as we stood beside the production schedule. They're unavailable. Still no explanation. Booked solid. Apparently. Hand Keller Installations. Same answer. Both companies had worked with Grant before Northline existed. I looked at the dependency map Naomi had built. The pattern was worse than I expected. We had developed our own clients, our own production team, and most of our own suppliers, but installation was different. Exhibit work moved across cities and convention centers, so companies relied heavily on trusted subcontractors. Several crews we used regularly had entered our network through relationships my father had built decades earlier. Derek had found the weakest point in my independence. We need alternatives outside this circle, I said. Naomi nodded. Already working on it. I reached for the phone. I'll call the regional crews. She put her hand over it. No, I stared at her. No. You told me to run operations. Let me run operations. We're 3 days from loading. Exactly. You making 12 desperate phone calls doesn't improve that. I almost argued. Instead, I took my hand off the phone. That was harder than I wanted to admit. For years, my answer to instability had been control. If something mattered, I handled it myself. If something went wrong, I worked longer. It had helped me build Northline, but Naomi was right. If the company could only function when I personally touched every problem, I hadn't built independence. I had built another dependency. Okay, I said. Installation is yours. She gave me a short nod. Good. Then you can deal with the cousin waiting downstairs. What? Elise called. She wants to see you. I met Elise at a cafe around the corner rather than bringing another family conversation into Northline. She was already seated when I arrived, both hands wrapped around a coffee she didn't seem interested in drinking. Derek says you're contacting Ellison clients directly, she said before I sat down. Some of them. He says you're using the situation to strip the company before it fails. Do you believe him? I don't know what I believe. At least that was honest. I opened my laptop. Then don't believe either of us. Look. I showed her the Valero scope Derek had sold, then Northline's actual revised scope. I showed her the production hours, installation requirements, and the difference between what Derek had promised and what his own company could produce. He told Valero this capacity was available to him, I said. It wasn't. Elise frowned at the screen. Thought you were merging? No, he needed me to merge after he made the promise. That's not how he explained it. I know. She leaned back. He told the staff you had been discussing this for months. I hadn't spoken to him in 11 months. That landed. Elise looked down at her coffee. There's something else. I waited. He's preparing another proposal. For what? Her convention account. Bigger than Valero? My stomach tightened. Does it include Northlen? Not by name everywhere. But the fabrication schedule assumes access to equipment Ellison doesn't have. Has the client signed? I don't think so. Derek said the final proposal goes out tomorrow. I closed my laptop. This was different. Until now, every move I made had been about cleaning up commitments already made. Derek was still creating new ones. Financial desperation explained his first bad decision. Continuing after he knew what it was doing to Northline was something else. Who's the client? Elise hesitated. If I tell you, Derek will know it came from me? Then don't tell me. She looked surprised. What? I'm not asking you to steal documents or become my spy. If the proposal is circulating in the industry, I'll find another way to identify it. She stared at me for several seconds, then gave me the company name voluntarily. Meridian Convention Group. Back at Northline. Our sales manager knew one of Meridian's project directors. I didn't ask him to pitch them. I asked for an introduction. When I finally got the project director on the phone, I kept it simple. I understand you may be reviewing an Ellison event supply proposal that includes custom fabrication capacity. I'm not asking you to discuss their pricing or terms. I only need to clarify that Northline Exhibit Works is not part of their bid team and has not committed production capacity to that project. There was a long pause. That's not what we understood. That's why I'm calling. Hear you saying Ellison can't deliver the proposal. I can't speak for what Ellison can deliver. I can only tell you what Northline has agreed to deliver, and the answer is nothing. Meridian didn't award me the business. I hadn't asked them to. They simply removed Derek's proposal from immediate consideration and requested a revised plan that didn't depend on Northline. For the first time, I had stopped one of his promises before it became somebody else's crisis. Derek called less than 10 minutes later. You called Meridian. Yes. You interfered with an active bid. I clarified that my company wasn't part of it. You had no business contacting them. You put my capacity in your proposal. That made it my business. You're trying to destroy Ellison. No, Derek. I'm stopping you from selling Northline. He hung up. His response came faster than I expected. That afternoon, Naomi showed me 3 messages. 2 installation companies that had previously expressed availability were suddenly unable to take Northline work for the next month. A specialty rental partner also changed terms on an upcoming quote. None of them said Grant or Derek had told them to do it. They didn't have to. They're squeezing the network, Naomi said. Then we build another network. That takes time. So did this one. We started calling beyond the Circle North line normally used. Regional crews, smaller installation companies, independent supervisors we had worked with only once or twice. It cost more. It was less comfortable. But by the end of the day, Naomi had found enough coverage to keep Valero alive if nothing else went wrong. Then 2 emails arrived within 15 minutes of each other. Both were from subcontractors who had worked with Ellison Event Supply for years. Neither was asking us to stop calling. They were asking whether Northline needed installation crews. The first message included one question that caught my attention. Are your standard terms still net 30? I called the owner. Yes, I said. Why? He hesitated. I'd rather not get into somebody else's finances. Then don't. Another pause. Ellison hasn't been paying us in 30 days. I sat up. How late? Late enough that I'm looking for more stable work. After the call, I walked into Naomi's office. Those crews aren't moving because they suddenly like me better than Grant. I assumed not. They're moving because Ellison isn't paying reliably. Naomi leaned back in her chair. So Derek's using your father's network to isolate us, while the network itself is starting to lose faith in him. I looked at the dependency map spread across her desk. For weeks, Derek had been betting that if he trapped enough clients, vendors, and family members between us, I would eventually have no choice but to save him. But dependency worked both ways. Clients needed someone who could deliver. Crews needed someone who could pay. Vendors needed customers whose promises meant something. Derek thought those relationships belonged to my father because Grant had built them. He was about to learn the same lesson he had refused to learn about Northline. Relationships weren't ownership, and the moment people stopped trusting what Ellison promised, the network Derek thought he could use against me had somewhere else to go. The first 2 subcontractors who came to Northline weren't there because they had chosen sides in a family fight. They were there because invoices had due dates. I met them with Naomi in our conference room the next morning. Both men had worked with my father for more than a decade, and neither looked comfortable discussing Ellison Event Supply with me. That was fine. I wasn't interested in making them testify against my family. We have 2 installations coming up, Naomi said, sliding the schedules across the table. We need crew coverage here and here. Standard Northline terms. No exclusivity. One of them, Tom, studied the dates. Grant won't love us taking this. You don't work for Grant, I said. No. And you don't work for me. If the dates and terms make sense, take them. If they don't, don't. He looked at me for a second, then back at the schedule. Net 30? Hallways. The other contractor gave a quiet laugh. That alone makes the dates more attractive. I didn't ask how late Ellison was paying him. I didn't need to. By lunch, both crews had accepted Northline work. By the end of the week, 2 more subcontractors had contacted Naomi. Nobody announced that my father's network had switched allegiance. That wasn't what was happening. The network was simply behaving like a network instead of family property. People went where work was reliable. That realization took some of the fear out of Derek's threat. He had believed Grant's relationships were something he could turn on and off. But relationships only remained powerful while people trusted the person at the center of them. The real test came 3 days later when Valero's project loaded out. We had recovered most of the time lost to the material delay, but not all of it. I arrived at the convention hall before 6 in the morning and found Naomi already walking the floor with our installation supervisor. The first wall went up cleanly. Then the illuminated header didn't align with one of the support points. A month earlier, I would have climbed into the problem myself. Instead, I watched Naomi and the crew lead make the adjustment. 25 minutes later, it was fixed. By noon, the structure was standing. By 4, graphics were installed. The next morning, Valero's marketing director walked the finished booth with me. "This is what we should have been sold in the first place," he said. I knew what he meant. Not the design, the certainty. I'm sorry you got pulled into this, I said. You didn't take our deposit. No? You also didn't pretend that made it somebody else's problem. That mattered more to me than I expected. I thanked him and went back to Northline. I didn't post photographs with some caption about delivering when others couldn't. I didn't call industry contacts to tell them Derek had failed. We had promised a project, we had delivered it. That was enough. 2 days later, Cameron from Hawthorne called. We'd like to reopen the annual renewal discussion. I leaned back in my chair. What changed? We finished our review. Your ownership structure is clear. And we've watched how you handled Valero. We're still independent. That's what we wanted confirmed. Hawthorne wasn't handing the contract back as an apology. We still had pricing and scope to negotiate. But the door Derek had nearly closed was open again, because Northline had done exactly what I told my employees we would do: honor the promises that were actually ours. That afternoon, Derek emailed asking for a meeting. He requested neutral ground. So we met in a private room at a business center across town. My parents were already there when I arrived. Derek had a folder in front of him. For once, he didn't begin with a speech about family. 50 obviously isn't workable anymore, he said. I almost smiled at the word obviously. 3 weeks earlier, he had walked into my building as if 50% of Northline were the reasonable starting point. We're proposing 25%, he continued. In exchange, Northline gets Ellison's remaining accounts, rental inventory, and vendor relationships. No? My father leaned forward. At least look at the numbers. I don't need 25% of my company to acquire rental inventory. Derek's jaw tightened. Fine. 15. That was the moment the power shift became impossible to ignore. 50% had become 25, then 15, and I hadn't offered anything. No equity, I said. At any percentage. Paula looked exhausted. Mara, the company may not make it through the season. There was no satisfaction in hearing that. Ellison Events Supply employed people who had nothing to do with what Derek had done. Some of them had worked there since I was a teenager. How many employees? I asked. Derek gave me a suspicious look. Why? Because employees and ownership are different questions. He hesitated, then told me. The number was smaller than it had been when I was young, but large enough to matter. My father spoke quietly. If Ellison goes under, this isn't just Derek losing a title. People lose jobs. Vendors lose money. 32 years disappear. For the first time since the meeting started, I understood why my parents were terrified without agreeing that their fear was my obligation. I'm willing to consider qualified employees if Northline has positions for them, I said, individually. Normal application process. Derek shook his head. You want to pick the company apart. No? I'm telling you what I will and won't take responsibility for. I continued. If equipment is sold, Northline may bid on assets we actually need. Fair market process. We will keep the direct contracts we signed with clients. We will not assume Ellison debt. We will not give you ownership in Northline. And you will not have an executive position here. Derek stared at me. So I get nothing. You keep whatever you still own. I'm just not giving you what I own. My father's face tightened. You're really going to let the company die? That question followed me home. Not because I thought he was right, but because I knew I had enough resources to soften some of what was coming. I could probably structure a larger acquisition. I could absorb more employees. Maybe even take on parts of Ellison's obligations. The old instinct returned. If I was capable of fixing something, maybe refusing to fix it made me responsible for the outcome. The next morning, I sat with Naomi and reviewed Northline's actual needs. Not my parents' needs, not Derek's ours. We could potentially use another cutting system. We needed additional storage racks. We might have room for several experienced employees if upcoming contracts closed. We did not need Ellison's debt, its entire rental inventory, or Derek. So what are you thinking? Naomi asked. We help where helping makes sense. Hand where it doesn't. We let consequences belong to the people who created them. A week later, Ellison Event Supply announced that it was reducing operations and selling a large portion of its equipment. The asset list arrived in my inbox that afternoon. I scrolled through carts, shelving, tools rental inventory, and old fabrication equipment. Then I stopped. Near the bottom was a heavy steel worktable scarred by years of cuts and measurements. I knew that table. When I was 14, my father had stood beside me at it and taught me how to measure twice before cutting anything expensive. At 16, I had walked past the same table, carrying the bag I took with me when they told me to leave. Now it had a lot number and an estimated sale value. I stared at the photograph longer than I should have. For 17 years, my family had acted as though everything I knew traced back to them, and therefore some part of everything I built belonged to them. Now the business they had used to make that argument was being dismantled one piece at a time, and for the first time, I was the one who got to decide whether any piece of it belonged in my future. I went to the Ellison Event Supply equipment sale because Northline needed equipment, not because I wanted to watch my family lose theirs. I reminded myself of that twice in the parking lot before I went inside. The warehouse looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe everything does when you return to a place that once had the power to define your whole world. Buyers moved between numbered lots, checking motors, measuring shelving, opening tool cabinets. My father stood near the office talking to the auction coordinator. My mother was beside him. Neither of them expected me. Paula saw me first. Her eyes moved from my face to the bidder packet in my hand. "You're buying? If there's something Northline needs." For half a second, I saw relief on her face. "There's a lot here you could use. Maybe." That was all I gave her. I walked the floor with the list Naomi and I had prepared. Cutting system, if the price stayed within our limit. 2 sets of storage racks. Several heavy worktables. Nothing else. I didn't bid on rental inventory because we didn't need it. I didn't bid on office furniture because ours was fine. When the cutting system climbed above the number Naomi and I had agreed on, I stopped raising my paddle. My father noticed. "That's worth more than that," he said quietly. "Maybe to someone else. Mara, if Northline buys more of this, it helps everybody." I looked at him. "That's not how I'm deciding what to buy." He turned away. 17 years earlier, I would have spent the rest of the day wondering whether I had disappointed him. Now, I checked the next lot number. The old steel fabrication table came up late in the sale. Nobody wanted it badly. It was heavy, scarred, and outdated compared with the modular tables most modern shops used. I bought it for an ordinary price. No dramatic bidding war. No symbolic victory anyone else would have understood. When the auction ended, Northline owned 1 set of racks, 2 worktables, and a few smaller pieces of equipment. Another buyer took the cutting system. I was fine with that. My mother wasn't. "You could have bought more," she said as I prepared to leave. I could have. It would have made this easier. I looked around the warehouse. "For who?" She didn't answer. Over the next 2 weeks, applications began coming in from Ellison employees. I deliberately stayed out of the first round of interviews. Naomi ran them with our production lead because I didn't want someone getting a Northline job, simply because I remembered them from childhood. I also didn't want someone rejected because they had stayed loyal to my father. 5 employees applied, 3 were hired, 2 weren't right for the positions we had. When Grant called asking whether I could find room for a long-time warehouse supervisor, I told him the same thing I told everyone else. He can apply. You know him. That's why I shouldn't decide by myself. My father went quiet. Everything has to be a principle with you. Maybe once that would have sounded like criticism. Now it sounded almost accurate. Not everything? I said. Just things that affect other people's livelihoods. Derek never replied. I heard through Elise that he had taken a sales position with another regional event company. The news surprised me less than I expected. Derek had always been good at selling. He could walk into a room, understand what people wanted, and make possibility sound inevitable. What he had never been good at was accepting the boundary between what he could promise and what belonged to someone else. Losing Ellison didn't erase his talent. It simply meant he no longer had a family company absorbing the consequences when his confidence outran reality. I didn't need him ruined. I needed him out of Northline. By early fall, Hawthorne completed its review and renewed with us. We negotiated the account like any other client. They pushed our pricing. We pushed back on turnaround times. Nobody mentioned Derek during the final meeting. That, more than anything, made the crisis feel finished. Northline had become Northline again. My parents moved out of the house I had grown up in a month after the sale, without the business producing what it once had. The mortgage and upkeep no longer made sense. They found a smaller place about 20 minutes away. Paula invited me over after they settled in. I almost declined, then decided limited contact didn't have to mean pretending nothing happened. My father was inside unpacking, so Mom and I sat on the small back porch. For several minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Then she said, "I still don't understand why it had to end this way." I knew exactly what she meant. What way? The company gone. Your father starting over at his age. Derek working for somebody else. She folded her arms. Was proving your point worth all that? There had been a time when that question would have pulled me into an hour-long defense. I would have listed everything Derek did, every warning they ignored, every reason the outcome wasn't mine to own. Instead, I watched a car pass on the street beyond their yard. I didn't make Derek sell work he couldn't deliver, I said. I didn't make Dad tell people Northline belonged partly to Ellison. And I didn't make you choose between your children. Her face tightened. We didn't choose. You did when I was 16. Mara, I'm not asking you to apologize. That stopped her. I'm not asking you to agree with me anymore either. My father had stepped into the doorway behind us. He looked at me for a long moment. I suppose I always thought you'd come back eventually. There was no apology in it. But for once, I didn't need to search for one. I did come back, I said. I just didn't come back to work for you. A few days later, the old steel fabrication table arrived at Northline. We cleaned it, leveled it, and put it in the training area. Not my office, not the lobby. I didn't want it displayed like a trophy from a defeated enemy. It was a worktable. It should be used for work. Naomi found me running my hand across one of the old measurement marks. Keeping a souvenir, she asked. Keeping a table. Very sentimental. Don't tell anyone. She laughed and walked away. Later that afternoon, one of our younger employees was learning how to lay out a cut on it. She looked at the worn surface and asked, "Where did this thing come from?" I thought about being 14 beside my father at that table, learning to measure twice before cutting expensive material. I thought about walking past it 2 years later with everything I owned stuffed into a bag. Then I looked around Northline, the machines, the people, the schedules on the wall. The company my family once believed they could claim because I had learned my first lessons in their warehouse. It came from the place where I learned what kind of company I didn't want to build, I said. At 16, I refused to protect Derek from the consequences of his own decision, and I lost my home for it. 17 years later, my family asked me to do almost the same thing again. Only this time the price was half my company. I gave them the same answer. The difference was that this time, I wasn't a teenager waiting for someone else to decide whether I belonged. I had employees I trusted, clients who knew what my word meant, and a business built around promises we could actually keep. My family lost control of Ellison Event Supply because they spent too long believing someone else would always absorb the cost of their choices. I didn't destroy them. I simply stopped volunteering to be that someone. And sometimes I still wonder which decision really changed my life more, refusing to lie for my brother at 16, or finally understanding at 33 that being able to save someone doesn't mean you're obligated to save them from themselves.